Okay, so my responsibilities include Cotai Travel, and that's the travel agency that the Venetian owns. It's the largest travel agency in Macau. And then secondarily, I'm in charge of the team at the high-speed railway stations that we have. So for the high-speed rail, it's very important to us for the mass market. And we have teams at Wuhan Station, Guangzhou Station, and Zhuhai.
Why are you working here in Macau, not like other office in, I don't know, in U.S. or in mainland China?
In terms of background, when I got my MBA, I focused on, it was a business program with a language, and I focused on Mandarin. Okay, so I was interested in China. And then I worked for GE Capital, and then I went to Microsoft for 7 years. And with Microsoft, I worked in Seattle, Tokyo, and Beijing. And Beijing was towards the end of my time with them, and it was based on my interest in China. So when you're in a corporation like that, I was in charge of finance for China, for Microsoft. After you've been in the role a couple of years, it's time to move on to a bigger role. And my next move was to take on a worldwide role back at headquarters in Seattle. And I didn't want to do that. So I looked around Greater China, what was going on with American companies, which American companies had the biggest opportunity, who was investing the most, who was doing the most interesting thing. And the top of the radar was Las Vegas Sands in terms of investment in Greater China. So I reached out to them because my interest was to be in the region. So that's how I found my way down here.
So is there any communication barriers or the difficulties we are facing for it?
I can speak basic Mandarin, so I have some Mandarin. So no, communication isn't a problem.
Do you know how many countries people are you working together?
So for the team members, I've heard numbers of like 40, 45.
45 countries?
People from around the world, yeah.
So have you ever faced each of them?
Do you work with the older group together every time, or just you met with a manager or several managers?
So I've worked here 7 years. So I think I've worked with a broad representation of those 40 plus countries in terms of team members.
But of course you will have cultural differences. And how do you deal with this with them?
I think that's part of kind of living abroad. And so I've worked in Tokyo and Beijing, and I've lived in Taiwan as well. So for myself personally, I'm pretty familiar with Chinese culture, and you can say Asian culture secondarily. So my personal experience was by living in those different countries, I've developed, what would you say, cultural awareness. Yeah. So I think that's very important to have had that experience.
Can I ask how many employees are in your charge?
So I have approximately 50 right now.
50?
Yeah.
All in the office? Or?
Between the two travel agency offices and the team in China. They are a mixture of mainland China, Macau, Hong Kong, and overseas, Middle Eastern.
So it's easier to communicate with them or working with them?
Well, I think you need to adjust. It's not an option to let those little things become an issue. So just shut up, you guys have to. I'm not going to. And if people start criticizing the other, you just stop that. Well, you just don't allow that to become relevant. They can have their personal opinions, and you'll never change their personal opinions. But this is the work environment, and you're here to get a salary. So complain in your off hours. And I'm not just talking this company. in my other companies I worked at. If you can't work with other people, bye-bye. It's just a certain level of professionalism. That is the standard of having the job, and it's not optional. When I was in Beijing, there was a big issue of the mainland Chinese people working with the Taiwanese team, and we had a lot of Taiwanese on the team. But so maybe the equivalent now that I'm in Macau is mainland Chinese working with Hong Kong, like you say. So no, I've seen this when you saw. And then Japan hates all foreigners, right? They hate everybody. So, the fact that they have to deal, So no, I've clearly experienced that in every work environment. But so it exists, but it can never be an issue.
So for your daily work, all of you communicating in English or Mandarin?
No, in English. Yeah.
So all the documents are in English.
Yes. For me, but that's not for everybody.
Okay.
Our legal department, everything's in Portuguese. Yeah, and for a company to operate in that environment, it's challenging.
Why don't you just change all the documents to English, for example?
Well, interestingly, and I've always found this interesting, our legal department will not accept any contracts in Chinese. Yeah, so this company just made that decision that we have a right, when we establish a contract with you, to dictate the language if you want to do business with us, because we're that big, right? And other companies, it's not unique. I'm sure Siemens maybe insists on German contracts or whatever. Companies will do this. So that's one way to manage the complexity. You need to make sure you don't abuse that, because there can be repercussions of that. So you'll see some of the issues Microsoft has in China.
Yeah.
So you can be the big guy, but if you abuse it too much, there can be a backlash. And Microsoft has had such backlashes in China, mainly by the government. When Microsoft pushes too hard on piracy, you're stealing our software. 90% of Microsoft software in China is stolen. So that's something the government, the company has to manage. How do you say, we love you, China, but will you please stop stealing our software?
What characteristics do you think an international management should equip with, or what trait have you already learned or become one of your characteristics from the experience?
I think you just kind of have to be open to new things. Be open to new things, but the reality is I'm an American, and that's never going to change, and I don't want it to change, right? And you're Chinese, and that's not going to change. Yes. But so as an American, when I went to Tokyo to work, there's different aspects of the culture that you may or may not be interested in. There's a big part of the culture that after work you go drinking, for 5 hours. And I never did that. I wasn't interested, right? It's not me. I want to go to work and then go home. But you need to be open to these things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to change who you are. Yeah, I think just an openness is most important, and an openness and understanding that in Tokyo, in Japan, this is how Microsoft needs to operate, okay? But in China, how Microsoft needs to operate is very different. And can you be someone who says, okay, or are you going to be one of these people who totally freaks out and says, well, this is the way it's done in Japan, so we must do it this way in China. So if you're open and adaptable, because, and the adaptable is really important, because most people aren't. And a lot of people who go work overseas, at the higher levels, if you read the expat literature, they will fail within 2 years and they end up going home. And a big part of that is being adaptable. So as a Chinese, can you adapt to Macau? And or just also within China, can you adapt to working in different parts of China, because it's very different, right? So I'd say openness and adaptability. But adaptability, doesn't mean that you have to go drinking every night. Like in Tokyo, I just, no thanks. I adapted enough. I'm not going to go do that.
And how about your family? Things you are work different countries, they going with you or just...
Yeah, and that's very important. And I think another reason why expat assignments fail is also the other half of the family. So when all of you have husbands, if you guys want to travel the world, you need a husband that's interested in that. And if he's not interested, you guys, let's say you get an assignment in Singapore, but he really likes living in China. Well, professionally you may be doing well, but when you get home at night, this person isn't happy. So that ultimately, your personal life has to be healthy as well. So for your spouse, it's very important you have those discussions, and that person is open to it. I think it's harder to pursue an international career. It's harder. But I think it's more interesting.
How are you going to communicate with Las Vegas, Macau, and Milan, China?
Do you need to communicate with them and make some report or meeting with the other areas, companies?
Yeah, so our parent company is Las Vegas. Okay, and I can use the example of having worked for Microsoft as well and GE Capital. So you have a parent company, the headquarters, and then you have the subsidiaries, or where they're operating internationally. So in the example of Las Vegas Sands, our chairman and the corporate team is in Las Vegas, and the company is listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and they provide overall strategy, and they help with our development. So there's conversations between the relevant departments on a daily basis, if not weekly. So that there needs to be that ongoing communication. So for example, Las Vegas Sands, what's the conversation right now? I think there's daily, weekly conversation on the impact of the smoking ban. So, in the casinos, they've adjusted the rules on smoking. So Las Vegas, wants to know what's the impact. So we see it daily. We're seeing behaviors change. We'll communicate that to them. So that's an example of communication, that's going on daily. Coming from a finance background, at Microsoft, we would be having weekly conversations on the performance for that month. How's the month going to finish? Are you going to make budget? Where's the weakness? Where's the strength? Microsoft segments their customers into basically, large enterprise customers like a PetroChina. Is PetroChina going to make that purchase in November? Will it slip to December? And then another segment is small and medium enterprise, and that's called the SME segment. So in finance, I'd need to go talk to the SME general manager and say, how does November look? And then we communicate that to corporate, so they have the big picture understanding of how things are going on. So that's the communication between corporate and the subsidiary.
For Venetian, you have your own marketing team or marketing department, but for Four Seasons, you have their own marketing team. But what happens if they're I don't know, time conflicts? They got different ideas, opinions, or...
Let's start with pricing strategy. Okay, so we have all these different hotels, and we can't have them necessarily compete against each other. But what's one of the geniuses of the Sands strategy is the hotels they've chosen and the brands. So in terms of pricing, Four Seasons is at the top. Okay, so we will never have a situation where Venetian is charging more for a room than Four Seasons. There's some established rules we have. Okay, and then it goes Conrad. Okay, and then Venetian, and then Sheraton, and then Holiday Inn. Okay, so we have those rules, and that's a branding strategy. That's a pricing strategy. So then, this is an example where you'd never have you have all these hotels and you don't want them competing against each other. Okay, so it doesn't happen, but they would compete within those price bands. Okay, so you wouldn't have Venetian trying to steal Sheraton customers. You have different price bands. And then in terms of marketing, the way it works is there's many different arrangements you can have with a hotel. There's the model of owner-operator. Okay, so the owner-operator model is how the majority of hotels, when you see a hotel in China, let's say you're in Beijing and you see the Sheraton. Okay, the Sheraton doesn't own that building.
Yes.
Okay, someone else owns it. And the owner, this is the owner-operator model, the owner has signed a long-term agreement with Sheraton. And then Sheraton is the operator and manages that building. And then they're free to market however they want. So for Sands China, we have the owner-operator model with the Sheraton and Four Seasons. Okay, and the way this works is they operate relatively independent. So they have their own sales team. They have their own Four Seasons HR team, and then there's assumptions in that contract of the amount that we get paid, and then they go out and they work on selling all the rooms. Now the Venetian is something that we own and we operate. So the Venetian 3,000 hotel rooms here, we own and operate that. So it's all of our hotel rooms, and it's our HR team, our marketing team that's working on that. So when you talk about marketing teams, Sheraton has their own hotel marketing team, and Four Seasons has a marketing team, whereas the Conrad, Holiday Inn, and Venetian are all served by the same marketing team. And the way we prevent any conflicts is the fact that within this umbrella of brands, we have one CEO. So if there are any issues, we do have one person in charge who focuses on, the goal is maximization of revenue. How can we best do this?
So do you think the construction of the Macau LRT system will actually affect the operation of the whole group, the transportation?
I think there's going to be two things. As the light rail comes on, we're going to, each year, the growth in tourism increases.
Yes.
Okay, so to accommodate that growth, the light rail is very important. So it will help with that growth. So there will be people who take light rail, and there'll be people who come on the buses as well. It's a fantastic thing, because the streets are pretty crowded right now. If you take the shuttle from here to Macau Ferry, type of ferry terminal right now, 11 in the morning, there's going to be traffic.
Yes.
So in our focus is the customer experience. We're only in the business of the ferry and the shuttles as a means to get people here. We don't make money off of that. We don't charge for the shuttle, and for the ferry, we lose millions every year, right? So we fully support anything like light rail. We think it's fantastic.
So for you prefer to work here or like working in the U.S.? Which country do you prefer? Or it doesn't matter because the world is flat?
I don't think the world's flat. I think the person, if a genius is born in Bangalore,
Yes.
in Hefei,
Mm-hmm.
do you know Hefei,
Yeah.
Shanxi, or in Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say this guy has let's say it's a lady with an IQ of 160, right? Okay, I think that lady with the 160 IQ will have a much brighter opportunity in Seattle. This Thomas Friedman idea that, it doesn't matter where you're born. Yeah, I think it does.
Yes.
So it's getting flatter, but I don't think it's flat. So we were talking about cultural
Yes.
and working across cultures. And I think it's fantastic that the three of you are have come to Macau, and it's a different environment for all three of you, and you're seeing new things that you're not used to, and that's an important part of your education, a very important part, because you'll learn stuff in the classroom, but then when you get a job, you'll be in a work environment, and you need to be able to work with different types of people. So I'm a huge supporter of going abroad to study like you guys have done. But my point is, the education you have in the cafeteria when you have lunch and you're talking to different people. So hopefully you're not just talking to people. You said Beijing.
Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully you don't have lunch only with people from Beijing every day, right? And Fujian.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully it's not just Xiamen friends, etc. Right? So that learning you're getting is very important. But that develops your cross-cultural IQ, whatever you want to call it. And then the issue of Macau and the industries is a separate issue. So for me, I went to school in Washington, D.C., so that's a government town, okay? But that's not that important. What was valuable was, in the cafeteria, and the people I had lunch and dinner with each day, and what I was learning from them about. So I had a good friend. From Cyprus, and had a good friend from Kuwait, and then from different parts of the United States. So and then learning about different parts from China is important as well. Just like me, the United States is very different, and then you're learning that. So I understand your point about Macau, but I think it's similar to Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a government town. Macau is a hotel industry town. But for coming here for college, I think it's fantastic that you guys did that.
If we want to apply a job, should we choose those multinational company with the big name like the Sense, or should we go for some small company that's actually starts growing?
So I think it depends on the company. I think ideally, is college, is very successful college graduates. Your ideal situation is to get into a big company that's willing to move you around. And different companies have leadership programs. And if you can get into something like that, that's fantastic. Okay, so that'd be my first recommendation. Like a GE, I did that. GE Capital, and there's a leadership program. They moved you around. So given the choice, take that. Okay. Then, if that's not a choice, then I would really look at the content of what you're focused on within that small company and the big company you're talking about. And the content of that job is important. Because I think it's most important that you learn an incredible amount early in your career and establish a very strong foundation to build upon. And given the choice between salary or experience, take the experience, because you'll get the bigger money later if you have a foundation to build on. But given the choice between a higher salary but less experience, I wouldn't take that job early in your career.